Hello, my friends. Most of the parents who get in touch with me looking for support and advice and help have difficulties around managing their children's behaviour. This is such a big area of difficulty for so many people, trying to find the right strategies and the right way to think about and approach behaviour. So I thought it'd be helpful for you if I had a conversation to share with you here that I had with Joel Shaljean, who is the project manager of Essex Steps. So I invited Joel to come and speak to me to talk about this Essex Steps approach, what it means, some of the ways in which he teaches to think about behaviour, and hopefully find some ways that strategies for you to manage at home with your child's behaviour. Thanks so much for speaking to me today. Been meaning to catch up with you for ages, and it's been tricky times. But now we've managed to finally get together via Zoom, and I really wanted the parents to hear you speaking because you have so much knowledge and information to share. So maybe we could just start by introducing yourself and what you do.
Okay, so I'm Joel. I am the county lead for an analysis, planning and understanding of behaviour approach called Essex Steps. So I am responsible for the delivery of the training across the county, and we work with primary schools, secondary schools, special schools, further education colleges, care home settings, respite settings, parents. It's a very we've got a very broad client base, if you like. But I am responsible for training tutors to go back to their settings in their primary schools and likewise to deliver the content of what we do. And a big part of my job is also consultancy as well. So I'm working with schools where we are seeing increasing sort of complex behaviour. So I work with over 500 schools. We've got about 400 tutors across the county as well. So there's a very good chance that the parents that were listening to this, that their child's school will have a trainer. And if they're in a special school, then they'll definitely have them, because I am essentially employed by the Essex Special Schools Education Trust to go out and deliver consultancy and training across the county.
That's a brilliant explanation, thank you. And that's a big job, because Essex is a huge county and there are lots of schools. So could you then just tell us a little bit more then about Essex Steps, Joel? What are the aims of it? Now you've just spoken there about its primary focuses around difficult and dangerous behaviour. So what would you say are the main aims and objectives of Essex Steps?
We're really about promoting pro-social experiences and feelings. And what we tend to do is look at prioritising pro-social experiences and feelings for everybody involved in education and care. And so we have quite a set sort of structure that we go through. Whereby we try, and I'll come to this further down the line, but we try to sort of analyse what's really going on.
Joel, can I just ask you a question before you go on? Could you just clarify, please, what you mean by pro-social?
Of course, yeah. So pro-social is, we've all heard of antisocial, and we're fairly sort of aware of what antisocial behaviour is. Well, pro-social behaviour is behaviour that enables us to get on in life. Behaviour that enables us to get on with others. That's going to add value, and it's often referred to as positive behaviour, and antisocial behaviour is referred to as negative behaviour, but it's really about being part of society and giving back.
Brilliant, thank you. So I interrupted you, and you were just about to tell me about the aims and objectives of the Essex Steps approach.
Yeah, so we have two tiers of provision. And the first tier is called Step On, and the second tier is called Step Up. You see what we did there? Step On, Step Up. And Step On is really about analysing what's going on in a school. And I talk mainly about schools. Yes, we work with other settings, but it is essentially around primary and special schools, with some emphasis on secondaries as well. So I'm going to refer to schools. So Step On is really about trying to get a school to look at whether or not their policy matches their practice. So what's actually happening? What does their policy say about how they develop positive relationships in their school? And does our practice bear that out? So we do an awful lot of work with helping schools to develop a policy which is A, fit for purpose, and B, encouraging pro-social behaviour, rather than just being a simple set of punitive measures for dealing with behaviour that doesn't fit the bill. But essentially, what we've seen, certainly over the last 10 years, is quite a significant spike, particularly at Key Stage 1 with the schools that we work with, of kids that are just really, really struggling. And there are all sorts of reasons for that. And people will speculate as much as they want, but it is where we are. We have schools who are excluding kids at a rate that we haven't seen before. We've seen kids with complex and severe special needs and moderate special needs who are just being punished until they're forced out of the school.
I like what you said there, and I always say this, that when we are thinking about behaviour at Maze, I always say that dealing with behaviour is 1% what you do in the moment, and 99% of dealing with behaviour is about what's gone on beforehand. And I think that so many of our children have these additional or complex needs, and where the behaviours become problematic, it's usually because there's not been a good enough understanding of those needs by the adults around them, which has led to an inadequate level of support for that child that leaves them with a coping strategy, which we call difficult behaviour. So I noticed as well on the Essex Steps website that it talks about the key strategy being to promote therapeutic approach to behaviour. Could you just explain what that means, Joel?
Yeah, of course. So a therapeutic approach to behaviour is really looking at the experiences that we provide for our children. And those experiences will lead to the feelings that are created. And those feelings are likely to lead to the behaviour that follows. We can look at negative experiences that a child's had, which lead to negative feelings, and those feelings creating negative antisocial behaviour. On the other side, our response to a child's experiences, negative experiences, our response in a school, in our own homes, is to look at what we can put in place to counter those experiences, to create the type of positive pro-social feelings that we need in order to get on in life.
Yeah, I love what you've said there. Anybody that's ever heard me speaking knows that that's totally what I'm about. I don't like these rigid sort of behaviourist approaches to managing difficult behaviour, which is just reward the good and punish the bad, because they usually negatively impact our children. And apart from anything else, for children with additional needs, they don't really work. So what you've talked about there, this therapeutic approach, it's something about analysing what's going on, isn't it, for the child? Yeah. And I know you've mentioned to me that there's like 3 parts to the process of unpicking these difficult behaviours. I wondered if you could just outline those for the people that are watching.
There's it would be nice if we could fit it all together like that, so it's just 1, 2, 3, boom, boom, boom. Doesn't always work like that, but essentially what we're talking about is analysing, understanding and planning behaviour. If somebody approaches me or approaches any of my team and they say, we're really struggling to understand, we genuinely we want the best outcomes for this child, we don't know what to do. And the first thing we have to do is identify the behaviour that we're talking about, and getting staff to have a bit of a change of mindset about how they interpret that behaviour is the biggest thing, because we often hear words like kicking off, having a fit, having a meltdown, and they're often quite sort of they're quite negative sort of explanations of that behaviour. So what we need to do is, first of all, articulate in an unemotional and objective way the behaviour that we see. We don't talk about trashing and smashing, and we talk about factual explanation of the behaviour. And then from there on, we have a decision to make about whether or not this behaviour is a conscious behaviour or a subconscious behaviour. And that's really important. What we tend to think as adults is that it's conscious. They're choosing that behaviour. They're making bad choices. And when we do that, we cease to look under the surface and go upstream and look at what what might be happening, what it might be about. And so just a really quick explanation of one child that I worked with. He was in a science lesson, and he tore a display down. He threw a fire extinguisher. He was really rude to a member of the staff there. And then he ran out and he called everybody really rude names. And on the surface of it, this child appeared to be really sort of aware and making conscious decisions. But what actually happened, when I sat the child down, he was a year 9 boy, I sat him down and I said to him, "What's just happened?" When he was ready to talk, "What's just happened?" And he didn't tell me the things that he'd done. He told me how he was feeling. And what he told me was that in that science lesson, everyone was too close to him. And it was really hot in there, and it really smelt really sort of sulphurous. And the lights, he said the lights were flickering and he hated the lights. And it was too noisy in there. And it's like a light bulb moment. You kind of go, right, okay, so this child is overwhelmed. He was high functioning autistic, and he had sensory processing disorder. He was overwhelmed. And so on the surface of it, you look at this behaviour and you think, he looks like he's completely in charge of what he's doing. And the way we would deal with a conscious behaviour would be to do a bit of restorative intervention between him and the member of staff and the kids that he was rude to when they're ready. We'd get him to fix the display, help repair, do repairs. And we'd maybe get a fire safety officer to come in and talk about how important it is to have a fire extinguisher there in a science lab. Now, that if it was a conscious behaviour, you could argue that they're going to learn from that. But the thing is, it made absolutely no difference, none whatsoever. What we had to do is we had to step back and say, well, maybe this is a subconscious behaviour where there's more to it, and we need to look at what we can change rather than expecting him to change. And so we looked at it and we said, right, in this room, there is another space further down in the lab where he can sit on the table by himself, away from by double doors which open out. They've got different light, fresh air coming in, the smells are different, the people aren't near him, but he can still engage in the lesson. And it was that changed everything. It was his subconscious experience. It was his sensory experience which made the difference. He wasn't a problem in that lesson for the rest of that year, so 2 more terms.
I totally identify with what you've just said there, and as you were speaking, I was thinking about sensory processing difficulties. There's such an enormous area of difficulty for our children, and there are so few adults that actually know enough about it to know how to support children well. So mostly what adults do is see those behaviours like you say, what you've described there. I couldn't have described that better. And the example I always share at Maze is of a child, a year 4 pupil that I had in my class who kept running out of the classroom. And we kept doing the same with sanctions and, threats of removal of privileges and things like that. And none of it was effective until we realised that he was running out like 10 seconds before the school bell was about to ring, which was right outside the door, and it was painful for him. So dealing with the behaviour was about us saying, oh, the bell's about to ring, go and wait outside, and then when it's finished, come and meet me at the school gate and we'll send you home, kind of thing. Yeah. So often when we're able to understand what these sensory processing difficulties are, which some partly can explain these unconscious behaviours, what it means is that the adults make changes to their behaviour, and the adults help to support the child by making adaptations to the environment. And I was just going to jump in there and say that obviously what we're talking about here is how we start to analyse and understand the behaviour. And you've talked there about conscious and subconscious. So that's part of the work that you do, is helping the adults supporting children to distinguish between that. What are the other ways in which you help them to help the staff that you train to go through this process of understanding, analysing, understanding and planning?
Yeah, so if we see that it's a subconscious, or I think you refer to it as unconscious behaviour, or predominantly an unconscious, subconscious behaviour, then the analysis bit is crucial after that. So we have this thing called anxiety mapping. And what anxiety mapping does is brings us some predictability to why they're behaving like that. So an anxiety map would look like, it may be the day broken down into half an hour slots. And we have a scale up to 5, up to +5. +5 would be a dangerous behaviour. A +4 would be a difficult behaviour that was affecting everybody else. A +3 would be an anxiety which leads to their behaviour changing but not necessarily affecting everybody else. And then you've got 0 to 2, which is they're coping themselves. They're able to develop their own sort of coping strategies. You can do it with staff as well. You can do it with things that they're doing. So you might want to identify the different things that the child's doing throughout the day. And then you grade those particular activities on this scale. It may be that it is other children that they're around, and you list their most immediate children they're around, and you grade the level of anxiety those children create. But I have to say the most powerful bit is when you start looking at staff, and when you start looking at the relationships that staff have with kids. And we've already said this, there are some incredibly passionate and wonderful staff out there working in our schools doing a really tough job. But some of them have just got something about them which for that child sends them into being overwhelmed.
Yeah, can I just say something about that actually? Because I remember through my teaching career as well, exactly this situation. I loved teaching. I loved every day that I turned up. I loved the kids, and here I am still passionate about the subject of children and getting the best for them. And yet there were some children in my teaching career that I just couldn't quite click with or gel with. And I liked them. It wasn't that. There was just something that didn't work in the dynamic. And that also talks to this subconscious part that you've mentioned before, that subconscious is there for everybody. We're all only human beings. And so sometimes where there are difficulties in the relationship between an adult and a child, it could be because there's not really anything that you could put your finger on. Yeah. But that's the way of the world, isn't it? We don't like and get on with every person that we ever meet. But so I feel like it's important to point that out so that it makes it okay where there are difficulties between a child and a particular adult, because otherwise that can feel quite negative or hurtful, can't it?
I think it's worth saying also that staff can have, that kids can they can feel drawn to certain members of staff, which is the flip side of it. And one of the things that we find in all the schools that we work with is that there are a lot of parents who want their child to have one LSA, one key worker that works with them. And in terms of sort of creating an attachment, a healthy attachment, it may be that mum and dad have to kind of literally sort of hand the child over to that key point of contact. And I get that. But sometimes that child's experience just becomes that person in the school. And what we get is this incredible dependency, an emotional dependency to that one member of staff. And I think that can be quite problematic. But you only find this out in doing appropriate analysis, which is why anxiety mapping has been a real eye-opener for us. And it just gives you that predictability.
Yeah, I really love what you've said there, because what I can hear in the way that you obviously teach schools and work with the staff working in schools is to really understand all of these intricate nuances that there are around behaviour. And it's so important that work goes on, because I know what it's like to be an overwhelmed teacher, and where you've got a child that's presenting with behaviours that you find really difficult and challenging, you just need them to stop. So actually what you want is for somebody to come along and say, if you just do this, they'll stop doing that. And we know that behaviour doesn't work like that. So it's really important to be able to have these conversations, and then also to offer tools to people, well, also for children and parents as well as the staff, that can give everybody confidence that we'll get to understand what's happening here, and then we'll know what we can do to make improvements for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's helpful for staff to have a bit of an understanding about just a basic understanding of neuroscience as well. What's going on in the brain when this is happening. And I love Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain. You're familiar with that, where he talks about that. We've got these different parts of our brain: the reptilian part, the mammalian part, and the human part. And when we're overwhelmed, the human bit sort of flips. We kind of flip our lid, and therefore we're working very much with like the amygdala, the emotional center of the brain, and the reptilian bit, which is, and it's all about fight and flight and instinct. And what we're not able to do, because humans have only really been able to speak for about 90,000 years, these are far more developed and far more embedded than the human part of our brain. And so therefore, our understanding of body language, I think, is really important. So I train people on body language. I've done a lot of research on body language and the messages that we put across. And we do some quite interesting sort of activities on body language. How do we feel when someone invades our space? When somebody just walks in, do we give it away? Is there something we give away in our eyes? And two things that I ask staff to look out for are two classic, what we call freeze behaviours. So you've got freeze, fight and flight. And what happens after freeze is you kind of go, right, I've got to either go for this and fight it, or I've got to run away from it. And what we can do is encourage that fight-flight response to happen more quickly if we ignore the freeze behaviours. So two classic freeze behaviours are breaking eye contact and smiling. And when a child's being difficult, our immediate response, I don't know about you, but I certainly had this, and I'm tempted to do this as well, but my immediate response is, look at me when I'm talking to you. It's the freeze behaviour. If I'm forcing you to look at me, then I'm more likely to go into fight or flight. And don't laugh. What are you laughing at? If we know that laughing is a freeze behaviour as well, then we're telling them not to laugh and not to look away. And actually what they're doing is they're trying to survive. They're trying to cope, and we're telling them not to do that. And I don't even need to start on the whole issue of eye contact and anxiety and autism.
Oh, and that's a huge area, isn't it? Eye contact. And, we neurotypicals, we just like the world to be our way, don't we? And we find it really hard, weirdly, to accommodate other ways of being and experiencing, which is actually what we're supposed to be really good at. But you've described really well there, Joel, the connection that there is between what your feelings might be and what your actions might be. And I wondered if you could just maybe expand on that a little bit more, what tools you use for making those connections.
The roots and fruits tree is what we use. So we have anxiety mapping, which gives us this picture. It helps us to understand the pattern to behaviour, the pattern to how they work, the pattern to their relationships, the roots and fruits tree. So the roots and fruits, I'll try and explain it quickly. Roots and fruits tree has effectively got 6 blocks on it. Okay, so 2 sides, and it's got negative on one side and positive on the other side. And so at the base of the tree, you've got the experiences, and then the next 2 blocks up are the feelings that are created by these experiences. And then the feelings that are created by these experiences will likely lead to antisocial and pro-social behaviour. So when you put it into that, you can see, you start to see what you can put in place as a response with these experiences here, these pro-social experiences here. You can see what our response as a school, as a home, as a care setting, what they are, what they should be based on these negative experiences here. I spend a lot of time working with schools, and I say, right, let's look at your behaviour and relationships policy. They're called all sorts of different things now. It used to be sort of sanctioned policy and behaviour. A lot of schools call them relationships policies. How can we create positive relationships? And if you were to we do an audit of the type of provision that is in schools, and we ask staff to think about, to speculate on how they would feel if they were put through the types of experiences that the kids in that school go through. And it works the same for us as parents as well. So I'll give you an example. One of the most classic behaviour intervention strategies in primary schools is the traffic light system. And when you put the traffic light system into a therapeutic understanding, you just will never use it. Because if you take the red traffic light, so you've been incredibly naughty, you're going to go on the red traffic light. What we would ask in a therapeutic way is, well, how do you expect the child to feel when they're on the red traffic light? And in one school that we worked with, the head teacher put traffic lights up in the staff room. Staff weren't getting it. They weren't understanding this therapeutic approach. So they put a set of traffic lights up in the staff room, and they randomly put staff names on. And the staff completely hit the roof. How can you do this to us? How do you expect us to feel? And I think at that point they went, okay, yeah, I get you. Yeah, if it feels like that for us, then it's going to feel like that for them as well. And in secondary schools, we've got, often we see this thing called the C system. So you get C1, C2, C3, C4. C1's like naughty. C2 is like really naughty. C3 is right, you're out of the classroom. And C4 is you're out of the classroom, coming back for an hour's detention the next day. But at every point of that system, their name is written on the board. And all you have to think about from a therapeutic perspective is, how do I feel if I see my name on the board and everybody else sees my name on the board? And everyone will always answer, I will feel humiliated, embarrassed, I might feel angry. So yeah, we do a dive into policy, we do a dive into practice, and it usually comes out with some really, really encouraging stuff. So schools up and down the county are changing their behaviour and relationships policies, and it looks really, really promising.
That's fantastic, Joel. I love the sound of that work that you're doing. It sounds such important work, and it's so encouraging to hear that so many schools are engaging with it and engaging well, and really thinking about children and behaviour in a whole new way, in this therapeutic way, which is absolutely brilliant. So for any parents watching this little video that we're doing here, first of all, I've got two questions. First of all, how can they find out if their school has had this training? And second of all, how can parents receive this kind of training?
The short answer is they will probably realise that their school is or isn't embedding a therapeutic approach quite quickly. Because if their child is constantly being told off, constantly being put into isolation, constantly missing their break, being excluded, they're probably not on that journey yet. And I think it is a very powerful thing for parents to go to schools and say, have you thought about a therapeutic approach? Have you thought about how my child feels when this happens? And actually asking, because a lot of schools are desperate and crying out for help. When a school engages, what generally happens is me or one of my colleagues will train up two of their staff on a 3-day course where we learn all about a therapeutic approach. We learn all about what we can put in place to make it to really create the kind of atmosphere that our children, particularly our vulnerable children, desperately need. That if they get trained like that, then they can then go on and deliver parent workshops themselves based on these principles. I've delivered an awful lot of parent training. I've delivered parent training for maids. And I've delivered parent training in all sorts of other settings as well. And it's always been really, really well received. We had 90 parents turn up at one parent training session, which was great. And I do poke the bear a little bit, because I have to be, I have to stimulate discussion and get people sort of having an honest and objective look at what they do and whether or not it's getting the right.
And it's so important, isn't it, to talk about things that are really difficult, because we can't make them better if we can't speak about them. And I think, for me, this has been the eternal difficulty within the SEND system that, really hasn't worked well for our children, is you've got parents who are thinking, this isn't working well for my child, and schools feeling like we're doing the best we can, So I feel like the work that you're doing there and what you've described is just such a fantastic way to bridge the gap. So, well done for that brilliant bit of work. Keep going. So just to finish off here, Joel, where can parents learn more about STEPS?
We've got a website, so the Essex Special School Education Trust, ESSET, ESSET. On there, you can look at Essex Steps. There you can copy the link and you can send it to your school and get your school to get us in to deliver the training. They can speak to their school because there's a good chance that their school will have a STEPS trainer there, and maybe they've embraced it as much as they should have done, and maybe they haven't, and then maybe that's an opportunity for the parents just to sort of poke them a bit and get them moving so that the best outcomes are found for their child. Because in the end, there are so many vulnerable children, particularly our children with special needs, with complex behaviour, with mental health issues. They're the ones who are being put in isolation units. They're the ones that are being treated in a way that makes it look like it's all their fault. And they're just choosing to be naughty. And something needs to change about that. And I think we are seeing a shift, and amazing organisations like yourselves are really upskilling and training parents to see actually what schools should be doing, and whose responsibility it is to ensure that SEND is dealt with properly in the schools.
Totally agree with everything you've said there, Joel. And actually, recently I was been speaking to Kieran Pearce of the Multi Schools Council, but we were just talking about how much more impactful it can be to join together. So he's obviously got the children and young people's voice. In Mays, we're a parents' community, and then there's yourself doing work within the school, within all of the schools in Essex. It's that joining together, isn't it, with a collaborative, a collective focus on, something needs to change for our children because the outcomes for them are not good enough.
No, absolutely.
So,
we can I'll just finish off by saying that there are children in school who are being traumatized by the way they're being dealt with, and that thankfully we've got an increasing awareness of trauma and the impact of trauma. And we often think about trauma as being kids who've been in war-torn countries and talking about high levels of sort of abuse and sexual abuse and domestic violence and so on. But actually, trauma can be created in children in lots of different ways. And it's good that we're starting to see that, and people are starting to talk. And you've got, you've got mental health champions, and you've got schools who are actually looking at some really good government guidance on mental health and doing something about it. And our parents that we work with, so many of them, their children have neurodevelopmental disorders, mental health issues, and they're just not getting the support they need. And so I think collectively we've got a really powerful voice, and long may that continue.
That feels like a really good note to finish on. Thank you so much, Joel. Well, first of all, thank you for the really important work that you've been doing. And thanks for speaking to me today. It's been brilliant to catch up with you.
Thanks a lot, Sue. It's been great.
So there we are. Some different ways of thinking about behaviour, and some ways in which Joel approaches that with the schools that he's working with. And obviously I loved the approach that he was talking about, the therapeutic approach, which reflects so much my own approach towards Mays. And I love especially the idea of us joining together, parents and schools and young people, with a collective voice to make improvements for our young people. I've shared the links here to the Essex Special Schools Trust, where you can find more information about Essex Steps. And hopefully you can begin to explore whether your child's school has undertaken the training and learn more about some of the ways in which they'll be supporting your child and you too. See you next time.